Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 17 of Scouting Session. I'm Jérôme Bérubé, and I'm joined, as always, by Brad Allen. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
Hey, Jérôme, it's great. We get to talk about goalies. The best
Yeah,
time of year.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. As today's episode will be about a few goalies that are going to be eligible for the 2025 NHL Draft. Um, Brad will give us a lot of details about those goalies. So, Brad, let's get started. Maybe before we get going, maybe just maybe a few words on how is this goalie class looking this year, maybe compared to last year or the year before, where we had two pretty solid goalie class the last 2 years. How would you categorize this year's goalie class?
Not as good as 2023's, but nothing will ever be like 2023 is going to be like historical, I think. But 2024's, I would argue this draft has a better top end, but less depth. So pretty good overall because we really like the 2024 class and we feel pretty justified right now. Like we had Gidlov 4, Yegorov 3. They're excelling right now. Really happy with Kirill Zarubin's progress. Pavel Moisevic hasn't had a year as good as he did last season, but I still really like him. And then we had Nabokov in the top 6. Ilya Nabokov's been very good. The wild card for us, which is on me, Timothy Ivankovic basically hasn't played this year. And one of the reasons is because of a goalie we're going to talk about here in Pyotr Andreyanov, who's taken his starting job. So, but overall, I've been pretty happy with our list, and the class in general has been very good. Like even the CHLers have been good too. Like all of them really. Ryerson Leanders, even though he are for sure the one that's talked about the least is Leanders, but he's been decent as well. So a lot of goalies from that class. But again, this class not as deep. So I'm thinking if I was to guess right now how many goalies would actually hit and play over 200 NHL games from this class, my guess is 4. If things go really right, 6. And maybe obviously there's that mushy middle. Maybe we get 5 out of it. Somewhere between 4 and 6, which would be average. Average class is average class about five goalies.
All right, let's focus on this year's draft, and let's start in Sweden with Love Härenstam out of Skellefteå. Brad, maybe give your 2 cents on his season. He's been obviously he changed team over the course of the season. He's also been, Sweden U18 number 1 goalie in international tournament this season at the Junior A Challenge in December, and I believe also in November at the Five Nations. So maybe your thoughts, Brad, on this goalie.
Sure. So I would say we have a very different opinion than the consensus out there, where we've seen him ranked anywhere from 1 to top 4. He's discussed a lot. I think one of the reasons is because he is internationally recognized, did play at the U18s last season. And usually with a underage goalie who plays J20, they get a lot of attention, and that's for good reason. It's very difficult for a true 16, 17-year-old to play as a starter in J20 or really do well. And Härenstam did do pretty well last season. So a lot of eyes on him. A lot of people know him. And then now, fortunately for me, is when I actually scout his actual attributes, he feels set. He's 6.5 feet, 6'1". And the reason he falls under for me is that his reactivity in tight, specifically with his reflexes in tight, high danger shots, are below the minimum threshold that I look for at that height and that size. So now, could he continue his physical growth and his reflexes catch up to his frame a little bit down the road here in the next year or two, and then they get back over that threshold, and then I should have probably ranked him? The answer is it's possible. But it would mean at best, I have no problem just putting him in a watch at this time, which I know to some of you might be surprising. But I'm not a huge fan of this goalie. He reminds me a ton. I always have one comp of this a year, but it's for different reasons. Last year, I said that Timofey Ivankovic plays similar to Georgiev because they have a hybrid stand-up approach. That's actually right through Krasnaya's system. I don't know who Krasnaya's junior goalie coaches are, but all of them have all of the goalies in their system playing a hybrid stand-up style right now. And there was a couple of other goalies that I've watched in the NHL this season who are also starting to adapt that style. So that's starting to trickle around the league, which is really interesting from like a general perspective of one of the developmental trends that's going on in Russia right now. But another factor with this kid, when you look at him, is that like he just flat out plays like Alex Gorgiev. So I mentioned again, Timofey Vincent for me, because the hybrid stand-up style, I mentioned Gorgiev, but this kid actually physically, aesthetically, visually, when you just watch him on the ice, looks very, very similar. His set stance is similar. How he transitions from a relaxed into a set stance is very similar. And how he seals everything with his hands is very similar. So maybe from that perspective, that might be some of the reasons that people are on board with him, because when you look at him, you're like, oh, this looks like a good pro goalie. But you peel back the layers. And for me, when it comes, I have certain attributes that I weight extraordinarily heavily. And one of them is reflexes and the ability to react correctly and tight to high danger shots. And unfortunately, again, he's under that. So that's where we're at with Love Härenstam. And it is absolutely against consensus at this time.
Yeah, and I don't know if he really helped himself at the Junior A Challenge in December. Sweden lost in the final. He gave up, I believe, 7 goals in the final against Team USA. Team USA was not that good of a team. I don't know if he really helped himself in front of lots of North American scout, a lot of Ed Scout that were there. So probably, if Sweden had better goaltending in that final, they might have won that gold medal. So obviously, this week the Five Nation tournament starts in Sweden. So possibly lots of scouts will be there as well. So maybe like a good chance for him to bounce back a bit from that final back in December. So, Brad, we're going to move on to another goalie who's actually playing in Sweden, but is not Swedish. He's from Latvia. We're going to talk about a goalie that I don't know many people really know or have been, talk about. His name is Regnars Capars from. He does play in the Sweden Junior League. So, Brad, I'll let you talk a bit about this young Latvian goalie.
Sure. Yeah, he'll be the last Latvian that I've been really having to hone in on since Arturs Silovs. Very different than Silovs in terms of style. For the most part, minus one issue. So this goalie comes from the J18 system. He's about 6'1.5" feet tall, hyper reflexive, very different in terms of reflexes relative to Härenstam, for instance. And he plays on the worst J18 team I've ever seen. I can't, with all due respect, I've never seen defense as bad as I have in Ladingo's system there. So it's if you look at his raw stats, they are actually crazy to look at. Last time I checked, he had like a 916 flat save percentage, like a 4-point-something GAA, to give you an idea of how many shots.
I see them right now, and it's pretty funny. It's like first game, we'll go from game to game. 57 shot against, 55, 44, 63, 59, 49, 39, 35, 37, 58. Anyway, you get
and those are shots that are not missing the net. Those are just shots that hit him.
So yeah, exactly. They're not
if you watch all the games, it is legitimately, I have seen him have to deal with like 90 shot attempts on net. So the conditioning is impressive, incredibly competitive. Like his team can't score. They can't do anything. So if he lets in 1 or 2 goals, the game's basically over before it starts. But that is an advantage for me as a scout, because I can look at that and say, what happens to him psychologically? Does he get deflated? Does he stay in it? Does he battle? And that's what I have found is that, he'll stay in the game regardless of the score. The only time I've ever seen him truly dejected was when he went up against the top J18 team in Djurgården, who has some of the best prospects coming in the next couple seasons here out of Sweden. And so that was the one game where I thought I saw him get a bit flustered, and he got pulled in that game. But with the exception of that game, it's been he's absolutely the team MVP. It's not even close. And going back to Silovs, one of the similarities they share that was a problem for Silovs in his draft year, and certainly a problem for Capars now, is that they make themselves too small in the net. Now, the thing with Silos, though, is he was 6'4". So once you correct it and you get him to stand taller in net, stand taller in the butterfly, not shrink into himself or coil up into himself when he's making certain types of saves, you know that you're going to have a goalie that can still present large, which he's obviously learned to do now in the AHL in Abbotsford. With Capars, he's 6'1.5" feet tall. So when he's making himself look smaller, he's making himself look 5'11". That's a real problem. That's something that has to be addressed. Now, one of the ways that you look at that and you weight it, you ask yourself, what can you look for in a goalie to see if they can correct for it, is their shoulder girdle. The reason why is that the shoulder line, depending on the dexterity, will allow him to elevate his shoulders so that he can get back up and maximize whatever height he has. Unfortunately, this season so far, he's shown that he's pretty rigid with his shoulder dexterity. So therein lies the real issue at this time. So what I'm looking for in the home stretch here is if there's any sort of physical growth that allows him to show that he can improve his dexterity in his upper frame and use his shoulders so that he can pull himself back and basically stand taller in the net. So with the exception of that, incredible reflexes, excellent lateral transfer rates, very, very good on high danger shots. He also reminds me a little bit of Emil Vinny in the sense that when he's integrating with this post and the play is in a dead area of the ice, he's one of the most rapid scanners you'll ever see. Like, he's constantly scanning the ice over and over and over. And typically that means that they're actually over scanning, and it's a result of the fact that they're anticipating the play incorrectly. They're like trying to scan too fast for the play type. But in the case of him, I don't think that's actually the case with him. I think it's more the fact that he just processes so quickly. He needs other things to do in between plays to stay busy. It's almost like, remember, Jérôme, we talked about this on this podcast a bit ago, where Yaroslav Askarov out of SKA had adapted like a rhythm tapping with his glove that had to be removed and modified once he hit the AHL because he was making him susceptible to high danger glove side shots. Well, I feel like maybe that's something that Capars is doing as a result of very similar to what Askarov was trying to do, which was find some sort of rhythm that he could use to stay focused because the processing rate is so fast with some of these goalies. So very interesting goalie. I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I don't mind. No, you're not going to hear about him outside of this. And now maybe that we brought it up, you might see his name once or twice. But he will be a drafted goalie. He will get drafted late, and some team's going to go, wait, who's this? Or not team, but fan base of a team is going, who's this? We never even heard about this kid during the year, and that's because he's hidden in the J18 system right now. But we're on top of him. Interesting, exciting prospect in some regards.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like, not many goalies that are getting drafted out of G18. So
the last one was Nikita Talpila, wasn't he, Jérôme? Wasn't it? Or it was Florida's goalie out of HV. I can't remember his name off. Or was it AIK? I always mix up HV and AIK because they're jerseys. But yeah, it was a 5th rounder. He's playing the SHL right now. I can't remember his name to save my life, but Florida drafted him in the 5th round just the other year. I think it was 2023 or 2024.
Yeah, but anyway, it's pretty rare that it happens. So I think for him, maybe the U18 tournament at the end in April will be pretty important to get on a bigger map, I guess I could say.
And I do remember his name, Olaf Glifford. I'd have to look it up. I knew it would come. Glifford was the last one out of J18 that looks like something, and Portillo before him.
Well, yeah. So I think playing for Latvia at the U18, if he does well, will really help his cause for the NHL draft.
That's what Silovs did. Silovs was put on the map, I think, because of the U18, and we know that because we were talking to his agent throughout the season. Remember,
and also again, the name escaped me, but Montreal Canadiens did draft a Latvian goalie.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Playing the BCHL. Yeah.
He's now in the queue with Acadie Batters. But yeah.
Oh, he switched over. Okay.
He switched after Christmas holidays, but he was
good at the U18. I remember he was really good against the States. Really good.
Yeah. So maybe that's going to happen with that goalie. Like a good showing at the U18 might really help himself, even though he's only playing G18. Anyway, we'll move on to our next guy, Brad. Now we're going to move to the WHL with the Portland Winterhawks, Ondrej Stebetak, a goalie from Czechia who did really well at the Olinka tournament in August. And he's having a decent season with Portland. I mean, his number are not spectacular, but Brad, tell me, and tell our viewers about what have you seen from this goalie this season, and what makes you think he's going to be, an NHL draft pick come June.
Sure. So we'll start with what you just mentioned, the numbers. So if you look back, one thing that's fascinating about this goalie is that he came from Czechia's U20 system. Typically, you're dealing with like Michael Hrabal types, where it's like super toolsy. They dominated, like with Hrabal, he dominated in Sparta, came over. This kid didn't. Like his numbers in U20 Czechia last year are pedestrian. So it's like kind of strange, and comes in the Hlinka, does extremely well at the Hlinka. And then when I was watching him early, he was having some difficulty adapting to the smaller ice, specifically when attackers were cutting in towards his goal line, because he had to learn how to go from an overlap and into an integrated RVH, and then learn how to like cross from one post to the next, and understand how the players try to manipulate him behind the net. So there were some growing pains early that made him susceptible to certain types of play sequences where he'd have to integrate essentially. However, he's adapted very rapidly. And he's one of those goalies that you're going to get everything out of. He's almost like, I know it's a strange comparison, but I was watching him earlier. He's like the Brody Zemer of goalies. Like Brody's not the most talented kid, but he's real smart, and you're going to get whatever he is. He's going to maximize whatever that kid's going to be. He'll maximize it. That's kind of how I feel Ondrej Stebetak is in this draft. So if you look at like the top end, so like Ravensburgen, and two guys we'll mention here soon, and Ivankovic, Andreyanov, and Simeon Frolov will be the other. Michael Prodl as well. They're all more toolsy than this player. This is a kid with a 6'2" frame, and I would argue that he's basically well-rounded, but not exceptional in any one area. There's not one attribute I would label and be like, oh, that's the one that's going to like change the course of his career specifically because he's so good in that specialized way. But to make up for that, he's been fantastic. He anticipates to play well, minus the exception of like 2 or 3 performances where he was blown up and pulled. He has been like the difference in Portland. He has been way better than his underlying stats. And I feel like there is actually like considerable upside for a potential backup in the NHL. So he's one for me that's a bit under the radar, and I don't think he gets enough fanfare. And like, I mean, it was really sink or swim for him to go from like the Czechia U20, not dominate that, then get thrown in the starter role in the dub and actually hold is like extremely impressive. That's not normal. That's a very abnormal thing to do. So very impressive, but again, more limited in terms of upside relative to the top end guys in the class.
Yeah. Would you project him more as a backup than a starter? And I could have asked you about the other guys we talked before, but you mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast, you see maybe between 4 and 6 guys playing 200 games. So I mean, that doesn't mean there's going to be a lot of real number one goalie in this class. Some of those guys might be, just good backup.
So he's the first goalie we have. I won't say where he is on our list, but he's the first goalie that I think is a potential to be a true backup. And then I'm a human just like all of you, so I can make mistakes too. So what I do is like with him, he might end up, again, the Brody Zemer effect, you might get more out of him than I think right now. So I have him labeled as a backup, but I won't be shocked at all if he's in the right situation at the right time with the right team, with the right defense, that you can get a 1B status out of him for a couple of years, right? So he's in that, ironically, where we had Ilya Nabokov last year. That's kind of the territory. For me, Nabokov was not a true starter. I thought of him more of as a backup, but then maybe in the right situation, you could get a 1B option. If my time back, I probably would have been a little bit more bullish. We had him as high as 4, I think, Jérôme. We really liked him, but I pulled it back a bit. Where we'd probably say he could be a true, like a for sure true 1B on a team. But yeah, Stebetak falls into the first goalie that I actually have ranked that is, I think, a true backup in this draft.
All right. So let's finish with maybe a head-to-head battle between Jack Ivankovic and Pyotr Andreyanov from Russia. Two goalies that are a bit like average size goalie, or you could even say Ivankovic is a real, a small goalie for NHL. But as we see, if you're really, really good, you can play. As we see with Dustin Wolf in Calgary, obviously UC Saros in Nashville, and a few others. So, Brad, you wanted to do like a head-to-head analysis on those two goalies. So I'll let you go on Ivankovic and Andreyanov.
Sure. So, yeah, they're both severely undersized. I think Ivankovic is like a true 5'11" goalie, right, Jérôme? And then
Yeah.
Andreyanov, I think, is 6 feet. So
Yeah.
both severely undersized, and they're both play a completely opposite style to one another. So it's very, very interesting. So with Ivankovic, you're dealing with a very reflexive goalie. I would not say his reflexes are elite for his size, but they are high end to exceptional, depending on if you're talking about like what upper to lower halves type of thing. So very good hands, exceptionally active hands, very reflexive with his upper frame and tight to the net. So we talked about Regnars Capars having difficulty with his shoulders, being able to elevate and rapidly deal with shots in tight that are high to the net. Where Ivankovic doesn't have that issue to the same degree. His lateral transfers are very explosive, and his extensions, although they're a bit shorter because of his height, are full, meaning like the dexterity in his legs, everything he can get is growing right to the ice. He can do a split, no problem. So it's one of those situations where the athleticism meets the minimum standard necessary to play at that size. That's what we look for. Like I would say he's very similar athletically to Devon Levi. I think they're very, very similar. In some ways, arguably a bit more dynamic than Levi. But then Levi, I think, beats him in some areas where Andreyanov has him beat as well. So let's get to there. So the thing with Pyotr Andreyanov is he's a bit heavier set, which is like super rare. So this kid's 6 feet, and I think he weighs well over 200 pounds, which is like crazy for this age. It definitely hampers his movement occasionally. It makes it so some of his weight transfers, especially when he's down in an RVH and he has to make a counter weight transfer because he extends out with his stick or blocker to try to take away a lateral pass. When he has to counter weight transfer, freeze himself, then pull back across the net, that's where you really start seeing the limitations of his weight right now. However, he is extraordinarily nimble and dexterous, regardless of his frame currently. So this goes to Yegor Zavragin. I messed up on Zavragin, and the main reason why was because I didn't factor in his growth rate relative to his frame. Zavragin was also very young for his class. I think Andreyanov is as well, Jérôme. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure he's pretty young for this class as well. So Jacob Fowler is another example of this. So what you do with Fowler, and what I should have done with Zavragin, I'm most certainly not going to let it happen again, is you have to think of what they're going to be once they get conditioned. So I'm not looking at this goalie as what he is now. I'm looking at him as what's going to happen, just like I did with Jacob Fowler. What's going to happen when he slims down, gets conditioned, gets more explosive? Then you're going to start seeing the transfer rates that will allow him to theoretically hold in the NHL. And if that happens, the rest is there in spades. So where he really has Ivankovic beat is the ability to anticipate backdoor play types, 3-on-2 rush scenarios, odd man, any sort of odd man scenario or high danger scenario. He has more of a sixth sense for the position relative to Ivankovic, who's more reactive. Now, one thing that's fascinating about the reactivity of Ivankovic, and I think is misunderstood, like I haven't seen it discussed, but then again, there's not many people actually look at his position minus like the most general aspect of it. So the big issue right now with this goalie, and it's one that's like super rare, is that he actually is very susceptible in tight with his 5-hole. And you'd be like, you think theoretically that makes no sense because he's 5'11". His butterfly transfer should be so fast that his 5-hole should be a massive strength. Usually you look at 6'5", 6'6" goalies like Marcus Gidlaw, for instance, and look at their transitional butterfly rates, you would think, okay, they'd be susceptible 5-hole. Not super explosive. It's going to take them a bit more time to drop in his butterfly. If you look at what's happening in the NHL right now, one of the developing trends is how often shooters are cutting in on angles and shooting 5-hole. they're taking full advantage of how goalies attempt to set on shots, and specifically when they're trying to cheat a bit for potential lateral transfer. So a lot of players in the NHL are picking that up and waiting for the goalie to open up slightly, and then boom, they're going 5-hole all day. So one thing I'm looking at then is I have to find goalies who have ridiculous lateral transfer rate, transitional butterfly rates, and Ivankovic, that's actually where he's weak right now. So that's super weird, super rare. So what I'm looking for by the end of the season is, can he correct for that to a degree? Because if he can correct for that, the rest is there to at least suggest a potential starter. Andreyanov is in the same kind of criteria for me, also a potential starter, but completely different criteria that I'm looking for from him. I have to see if he can get a little bit more condition by the end of the season. Can he lose a bit of weight by the end of the season? Can he show a bit more of a lateral transfer rates that I need at his size? And if he can do that, then there's really a ton of potential for him to be the next really, really impressive small goalie. So I think it's super tight between the two of them. I definitely prefer Krasnaya's system relative to Brampton. So it's that plays a bit of a factor for me as well in terms of like how they're developing and where. But it's fascinating to see two, again, 6 feet, 5'11" goalies who have a real potential at a number one job down the road, and they play totally different styles. So it's really fun to watch from that perspective. And, I don't want to say where I have them ranked, but like they're certainly two of the more interesting and important goalies in this class.
Yeah, and there's like obviously other goalies that we could like talk about, but we're gonna keep those for future podcasts that we're gonna have over the course of the second half of the season. And obviously in June, like last year, we should do like a big goalie episode where we talk about every goalie that we're gonna rank in our book come June. So stay tuned for that. Brad, well, thanks for giving us all the info on those 5 goalies that we talked about today. You and I will be back next week with possibly another goalie episode, but to be determined. We might have some other subject that we want to talk about. But again, thanks everyone for watching. Brad, thanks again for being very passionate about goaltenders. And we'll talk to all of you next week for another episode of Scouting Session. So we'll talk to you guys next week.
Take care, everyone.